Why would an entire Egyptian temple drink red beer until every last person collapsed on the floor and then call it holy? Why was Rome, the empire that swallowed the whole world, so completely in love with wine and with sex? How do you get Greek women to drink their wine straight, run into a black forest at night, and scream for a god until their legs give out? Why would grown men fill a tent with cannabis smoke thick enough to completely lose their minds, just to feel a little closer to the dead? But here's the one that completely broke me. How do you get hundreds of people to drag 10-ton stones up a hill with no metal, no wheels, no wages, and nobody in charge? We love to picture our ancestors as grim, desperate survivors, clinging to life in the cold and chewing roots in the dark. Adorable. Completely wrong, because the real story is a little embarrassing for us. The first thing humans did the moment they gathered in large numbers wasn't to plant crops or raise walls. It was to get completely out of their own heads, to drink, to dance, to disappear together. You'd think civilization started with a plow. It genuinely looks like it started with a hangover. So I went digging. Into old bones, into the residue scraped out of ancient cups, into carvings and hymns, and the ruins of temples built for exactly this. And almost none of it is myth. It's completely real, and almost all of it is older than farming, older than writing, older than the wheel. So how did ancient humans actually party, and why does the answer turn out to be one of the most genuinely important things about being human at all? All right, I've already dug up the whole story, so grab a drink, sit back, and let me tell you exactly what our ancestors got up to. We like to imagine the party as a reward. First, you do the hard work of civilization, the farming, the cities, the laws, and then, once it's all built, you get to sit back and have a drink. The evidence says we've got it completely backwards. In a burial cave in Israel called Rakafet, archaeologists found the residue of beer inside stone mortars 13,000 years old. That's beer deliberately brewed before farming. Before bread was a staple. A few researchers still argue over the details, but the date holds. People were making alcohol before they ever settled down to grow grain, which leads to a genuinely wild idea. First raised in the 1950s and pushed hard by the anthropologist Brian Hayden. Maybe we didn't settle down because we were hungry. Hunter-gatherers were rarely starving. They worked fewer hours than we do and ate a richer diet. Maybe we settled down, deliberately, to keep the party going. Maybe farming, the thing that built the entire modern world, began as a way to guarantee enough grain for the next great feast. Booze, drugs, rhythm, sex. This was the social technology that completely turned strangers into a tribe. And nobody chased that escape harder than the people who built the pyramids. Once a year, as the Nile began to flood, the ancient Egyptians threw a party with one official goal: to drink until you passed out. They called it the Festival of Drunkenness, and it was no frat party. It was a sacred rite, run out of the temples of the goddess Hathor. The myth behind it is genuinely brutal. The sun god Ra sends the lion goddess Sekhmet to punish humankind, and she develops a taste for it, violently slaughtering people until the fields run red. To stop her, Ra deliberately dyes 7,000 jars of beer blood red with ochre and floods the fields. Sekhmet mistakes it for blood, drinks the whole lot, passes out cold, and wakes up gentle, transformed into loving Hathor. Humanity is saved by getting a goddess blackout drunk. So every year, the Egyptians reenacted it. They packed into the temple and drank red beer until they dropped, completely unconscious, on the floor. Then at dawn, the priest woke them with a sudden crash of drums, and in that reeling, hungover haze, they believed they came face to face with the goddess herself. The archaeologist Betsy Bryan, excavating the Temple of Mut in Luxor, uncovered a hall her team named the Porch of Drunkenness, built under the pharaoh Hatshepsut around 1470 BC. The walls show the festival in full swing, people drinking, being sick, and slumping into one another, attended by temple staff. Records describe crowds in the tens of thousands, and the inscriptions speak of traveling through the marshes, which Bryan reads as an Egyptian euphemism for sex. Drinking, music, torchlight, and bodies in the dark, all of it in the name of the divine. To the Egyptians, this wasn't sin. Getting obliterated was a doorway, the one way to completely burn off your ordinary self and touch something holy. The hangover wasn't the price of the night. It was the proof you'd been somewhere. But alcohol was only the beginning. To truly disappear, ancient humans reached for something far stronger. High in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, around 500 BC, mourners lit small fires inside wooden braziers and packed them with cannabis. Not the mild, wild kind. Chemical analysis at a cemetery called Dzierżonkoł found cannabis with unusually high levels of THC. Someone had deliberately hunted down the strongest plants they could to fill a burial chamber with smoke and get the living high enough to reach the dead. It lines up almost perfectly with what the Greek historian Herodotus wrote about the Scythians, throwing hemp onto hot stones and howling with joy. They were far from alone. Across the Bronze Age Mediterranean, people traded little ceramic jugs shaped like an upside-down poppy pod. Residue analysis confirms what was inside. Opium. Herodotus said the Scythians would sit inside their smoke-filled tents and shriek with pure delight, the ancient world's version of a night you can't quite remember. But the most genuinely terrifying trip in the ancient world may have unfolded in the Andes. At a temple complex called Chavin de Huantar, priests carved images of half-human, half-animal figures clutching the San Pedro cactus, a plant packed with mescaline. Initiates were dosed with that, or with a DMT snuff, then led through pitch-black underground tunnels, a stone labyrinth, while conch-shell trumpets blasted and echoed off the walls. Picture it. No light. Sound coming from everywhere. Your body completely dissolving. The carved monsters flickering into life around you. This was engineered transcendence, a machine built out of stone, sound, and drugs, designed to shatter a person and put them back together as something new. None of this was random fun. To understand why humans keep doing this, why we have always done this, we have to dig up the oldest party ever found. 12,000 years ago, on a hilltop in what's now Turkey, hunter-gatherers did something that should have been completely impossible. With no metal tools, no wheels, no farming, no towns, they quarried limestone pillars weighing up to 10 tons, carved them with snarling lions, scorpions, and vultures, and raised them into massive stone rings. The place is called Göbekli Tepe, and it's older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. Here's the question that genuinely haunts archaeologists. How do you get hundreds of people to drag 10-ton stones up a hill when nobody is being paid and nobody is in charge? You throw a party. Around the pillars, excavators found mountains of animal bones, far more than any local band could eat, the leftovers of feasts on a staggeringly large scale, seen nowhere else at the time. Wild cattle, gazelle, birds, all slaughtered and roasted in huge numbers. And they found huge limestone vats, up to 160 liters each, lined with the chemical fingerprint of fermented grain. Beer. The people who raised the first monument on Earth were deliberately brewing it by the tubful. This is the reframe made solid. Before humans built temples to their gods, they built a place to gather, feast, and get drunk together, and the sheer effort of throwing that party may have pushed them toward farming the grain to supply it. And when humans finally did settle into cities for good, they didn't build them around temples first. They built them around the bar. In ancient Sumer, beer wasn't a treat. It was daily food, wages, and worship all at once. The recipe survives as a hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, so to brew a batch, you literally sang a prayer. The beer was thick with sediment, so drinkers leaned in around a shared jar and sipped through long reed straws, the rich used straws of gold. And the taverns where all this happened were run by women and doubled as brothels and back rooms for plotting. The Sumerian alehouse was a bar with services attached and secrets in the corner. The state completely knew it too. Hammurabi's law code, nearly 4,000 years old, threatens tavern keepers with death for watering down the beer or hiding conspirators. We even have the receipts. A clay tablet from the city of records a man named Alulu collecting 5 liters of best beer. One of the oldest pieces of writing humans ever made is basically a bar tab. But the oldest high of all needed no drink and no drug. Nothing but a beat. In a cave in Germany, archaeologists found a flute. It's carved from the wing bone of a vulture, its finger holes deliberately spaced with real precision, and it is around 42,000 years old. Sit with that number. That flute is older than agriculture, older than the wheel, older than writing by more than 30,000 years. Before humans could grow food, roll a cart, or write their own names, someone sat in the dark and played a tune. Music isn't a byproduct of civilization. It's one of the first things we ever did. And music does something to us that's genuinely strange. Something we're only now able to measure. When people move together to a steady, repetitive beat, their brainwaves begin to sync, sliding into a slower rhythm called theta. The part of the brain that keeps track of you as a separate self goes completely quiet, and people slip into ecstasy, into trance, with no drug at all. The dancers painted on cave walls in India and in Sicily, whirling in linked circles, were very likely chasing exactly this. Here's why it mattered. The psychologist Robin Dunbar has shown that when we eat, drink, sing, and dance in sync, our brains flood with endorphins, the same chemicals that kill pain and bond us to one another. It's why people who dance together end up trusting each other. That endorphin rush is the glue. It's the thing that let a handful of strangers become a group of hundreds who would build, fight, and sacrifice for each other. Now take a whole crowd, drunk, high, and dancing as one, and you get something powerful enough to terrify an empire. The Greeks had a god for it. Dionysus, god of wine, madness, and letting go. And his festivals were the party that genuinely scared a civilization. His followers, the Maenads, would leave the city behind and run into the mountains at night, hair loose, torches in hand, dressed in animal skins. They drank their wine unmixed. And to a Greek, that alone was shocking, because civilized people always cut their wine with water. Drinking it neat was what savages did. Then they danced to pounding drums until they reached a state they called ecstasis, literally standing outside yourself. In the plays of Euripides, they go further, tearing wild animals apart with their bare hands. How much was real and how much was theater, we can't say. But the aim of the ritual was clear: to completely leave the self, the rules, and the daylight world behind. Even the refined version kept sex at its heart. The Greek symposium, a drinking party for aristocratic men, ran on wine mixed in a great bowl. Its strength dialed up through the night by a symposiarch, a master of ceremonies whose whole job was to decide how drunk everyone got. And it came with hired heterae, educated courtesans who played the flute, held their own in the debate, and provided sex. It's painted right there on the wine cups, in poses that leave nothing to the imagination. Then came Rome. In 186 BC, the Roman Senate violently banned the Bacchanalia, and by some accounts executed thousands. The historian Livy paints it as a pit of orgies, murder, and forgery. But here's the twist. The actual decree, preserved on a bronze tablet, says nothing about orgies. What it bans is unauthorized assembly, large secret meetings that mix slaves, women, and the poor beyond the reach of the state. Rome wasn't afraid of people having sex. Rome was afraid of a crowd that had completely lost itself, because a crowd like that no longer needs its rulers, which reveals the real secret hiding underneath all of it. The party was never just about fun. Around 2500 BC, near Stonehenge, thousands of people gathered every midwinter for a feast. We know because of the garbage they left behind. At a site called Durrington Walls, archaeologists dug up the bones of hundreds of pigs and cattle. Then they ran isotope tests on the teeth, chemical signatures locked into the enamel that record where an animal grew up, based on the water it drank and the ground it grazed. The results were staggering. These animals hadn't been raised nearby. They'd been walked in from all over Britain, from Wales, from Scotland, hundreds of miles on the hoof, deliberately hauled clear across the island so their owners could eat them at one enormous party. People came from everywhere, carrying food from home, to feast together and drag the stones of Stonehenge into place. That monument wasn't built by slaves under the whip. It was built by a party that spanned an entire island. This is what the feast really did. Anthropologists studying more recent cultures describe the potlatch, feasts where chiefs give away, and even destroy huge piles of wealth, burning it in front of everyone to prove their power and put rivals in their debt. The logic is ancient. Nothing binds people or ranks them like being fed. Pleasure, it turns out, was a technology, maybe the very first one, for turning strangers into a people. But every party that burns this bright has a morning after. The Babylonians had hangover cures, herbs ground up and smeared across the forehead. The Egyptians swore by a string of laurel leaves worn around the neck, because the pounding skull the next morning is as ancient as the party itself. And so is the crackdown. In China, rulers going back to the Zhou dynasty over 3,000 years ago outlawed heavy drinking. Early in the Han dynasty, if 3 or more people were caught drinking together for no good reason, they were fined. Someone always shows up to shut the party down. We tend to forget who made the party happen in the first place. The people, mostly women, who brewed the beer, cooked the meat, and cleaned up the wreckage, and whose names never made it into the record. But the deepest truth is this: the urge itself is older than our species. Humans all across the planet, with no contact at all, each invented alcohol on their own: rice and honey wine in China, corn beer in the Andes, barley beer in the Middle East, palm wine in Africa. When people who never met keep inventing the same thing, it's not a habit, it's a hunger. And the craving reaches back further still. Around 10 million years ago, our ape ancestors picked up a single genetic mutation that let them break down alcohol 40 times faster than before, so they could eat the fermenting fruit rotting on the forest floor. We were built to handle a buzz long before we were even human. Today we have pleasure on demand. A drink whenever we want it, a song in our pocket, a party any night of the week. We gained all of that. But we lost something too. The moment when the party was everything at once. Worship, treaty, marriage, medicine, and meaning, all in a single fire. For our ancestors, cutting loose wasn't an escape from real life. It was the most real, most sacred thing they did all year. So the next time you're in a crowd, a drink in your hand, the music takes over, and you catch a stranger's eye across the room, remember what's really going on. You're completely wired for this. You're running a machine that is tens of thousands of years old. Your ancestors built the first cities to keep it running. They walked pigs across whole countries for it. They breathed smoke to speak with the dead, and they drank until they met their gods. They partied like there was no tomorrow, so that we could have one.